I'm Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, and in addition to representing the 9th District of Illinois, I am was a member of the President's Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform, and at that time offered an alternative plan that didn't balance the budget out of the hides of the middle class. I had an alternative. And in many ways, this is an extension of that effort. 81% of Americans say it is time for millionaires and billionaires to pay their fair share. This is not about punishment, and it's not about revenge. It's about fairness. The middle class is disappearing, and it is not an accident. Over the last 30 years, there has been the most dramatic and deliberate transfer of wealth from the middle class to the rich, the very rich, and especially the very, very rich. Income inequality is now at levels that haven't been seen since 1928. Wages have stagnated for middle and lower income families despite enormous gains in productivity. Where has the money gone? So this chart from the Economic Policy Institute's book, Failure by Design, shows the change in average pre-tax household income from 1979 to 2005. The bottom 20% of households have seen an increase of just $200. The top 0.1% have seen an income growth, this is just growth, of nearly $6 million each year. The top 100th of 1% now makes, of Americans now makes an average of $27 million per household. And the average income for the bottom 90%, $31,244. This is not good for our economy. It's not good for our democracy. In the United States today, the richest 1% owns 34% of our nation's wealth, more than the entire bottom 90%, who own just 29% of the country's wealth. And at the very top, wealth is even more concentrated. In 2007, the combined net worth of the Forbes 400 wealthiest Americans was almost as much as the combined net worth of 150 million Americans, 50% of the population. Meanwhile, Republicans in Washington, who squandered a budget surplus, created the huge deficit with tax breaks that mostly went to the wealthiest, and whose policies allowed Wall Street recklessness to bring our economy to near collapse, are now demanding that the middle class foot the bill. Their solution to our fiscal mess is to gut vital programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. I assure you that's on their agenda. And to make cuts in domestic spending that experts estimate would cause an additional 600,000 to 800,000 middle-class Americans to lose their jobs. On this other chart, you can see some of the enormous cuts that they are proposing. For example, they want to cut $1.3 billion from community health centers, which are the only source of medical care for many families. They want to cut $5.7 billion for Pell Grants, reducing the size of the grant for 9.4 million college students by $845. And they want to cut $1 billion in funding for high-speed rail, important infrastructure jobs that will create important infrastructure that will create really good jobs. I was at a hearing, I was at a briefing today that also said if you want to cut waste, fraud, and abuse, you don't want to make a number of the cuts that they are making right now in inspectors general, in meat inspectors, that it actually makes it less possible because of their budget cuts to really root out waste, fraud, and abuse. It also cuts the IRS, where every dollar spent on the IRS would yield $8 to $10 in additional funding for our government. So once again, they're showing their utter disregard for the shrinking middle class and those who aspire to it by cutting important jobs programs and assistance for poor families. Part 2 of the Republican program for addressing our economic problem, and every problem, has been tax cuts for the rich. Enough is enough. Currently, the top tax bracket in our country starts at $373,000. So whether or not you make that amount of money or $373 million, you are in the same tax bracket. The Fairness and Taxation Act would enact 2 new tax brackets beginning at 45% for income over $1 million and rising in steps to 49% for income at $1 billion or more. Historically, these rates are relatively modest. During most of the Reagan administration, the top income tax rate was 50%. And over the prior 4 decades, the top rate was as high as 70, 77, 91, and 94%. It would also address a fundamental inequity in our current law by taxing capital gains and dividends as ordinary income in those brackets. Right now, rich hedge fund managers like Mr. John Paulson, who is reported to have made $5 billion last year, those hedge fund managers are paying at a lower rate than their secretaries on most of their income, because it is taxed at the capital gains and dividend rates of 15%. According to Citizens for Tax Justice, the Fairness and Taxation Act will raise more than $78.9 billion if enacted in 2011, allowing us to avoid the harsh cuts that will hurt the middle class. And as I said to begin, this is an idea the public supports. An NBC Wall Street Journal poll conducted March 2nd says, quote, the most popular way to reduce the deficit, placing a surtax on federal income taxes for those who make more than $1 million, unquote. 81% supported that idea. So passing the Fairness and Taxation Act will allow us to stop the war on the middle class, restore fiscal integrity and fairness, and fund those initiatives that reflect our American values and goals.